Hey everyone, so in today's video, I'm going to be talking about what to buy before you get a crested gecko. Now this video isn't going to be a care video, it is literally just going to be kind of a list and an explanation of everything that you're going to need before you buy one of these geckos. So I'm going to be touching on the enclosure that you should have and everything that you should buy for it. I'm also going to be touching on food and everything you need to feed your gecko. And then I'm going to be touching on other items that you might not think of before you go and get a crested gecko. So with that being said, let's get right to the video. So of course, we're going to start off with the enclosure and everything that you need for it. The first thing that you're going to need is your enclosure. You're going to need a 20-gallon or larger enclosure, and you want it to be vertical. If it is a long enclosure, you want to have it flipped up on its side. So technically what you see right here, this door, is technically the lid of a long horizontal terrarium. This is the Thrive Desert Essentials terrarium right here. And you can also purchase some terrariums such as this Exoterra one that I have on screen that are actually made for arboreal geckos, and they are the appropriate size as well. So you want it to be at least 20 gallons and you want it to be mostly made up of height, because crested geckos do like to climb and they will spend a lot of time up at the top of their enclosure and not at the bottom. So a lot of bottom space is not important for them. So that kind of gets into the items that you're going to need in your enclosure. Now, when it comes to the substrate that you put in your enclosure, there is a wide variety of ones that you can use. Now, I would personally recommend a substrate that holds a lot of humidity, such as cocoa fiber, reptibark, moss, even mud. So buying the substrate, you can choose pretty much whatever you want. If you're on more of a budget, then some substrates you can choose can include newspaper or even paper towel. You want to switch them out more often, but they're definitely cheaper to buy up front. These do not hold humidity very well, so you will definitely have a little bit more issues keeping the humidity up. Another thing you're going to need for your enclosure are 2 hygrometers and thermometers. You can use one that is combined. A lot of them are like 2 in 1, but you want to have a hygrometer and a thermometer both at the top and at the bottom. When it comes to thermometers and hygrometers, digital is always best. Now, in addition to the ones in your enclosure, if you can afford it, I'd highly recommend getting an infrared thermometer. These ones are very accurate, and it's also the best way to tell where the temperature is at any point in your terrarium. Another thing you're going to buy for your crested gecko is a food and water dish. These will generally come combined, as they are a little bit different than a food and water dish for any other reptile. And that is because you want it to be a type that is up at the top. There are many different kinds you can get. You can get magnetic ones, you can get suction cup ones, but you just want to make sure you have your food and water dish up at the top. If you want to purchase a separate water dish for the bottom, that is definitely an idea. I personally have one. It does help raise the humidity a little bit, and sometimes you will find your gecko in it either soaking or having a drink from it when it's hunting around the bottom. Another thing that you might want to purchase, which is something I strongly recommend, is getting little food cups to put in your food dish. Because the crested gecko eats a food that is a liquid, it's kind of a little bit tricky to clean sometimes. So if you just want to have it in a little food cup that you take in and out and put in the holder, that can be a lot easier. You can use bottle caps, you can use food caps that you buy from the store, but I just think it keeps everything cleaner. So now that we're done talking about the technical aspect of the enclosure, I want to talk about the enrichment and all the pretty stuff that you use to put your enclosure together. So the first thing that you're going to need is you're going to need some plants, lots of greenery. Some things that you can use, there's some tall plants on the bottom to kind of bring some height out from the bottom. And then you're also going to want some hanging plants. These can be magnetic or suction cupped as well. And you just want to have them around to provide some shelter and enrichment for your gecko. Sometimes they can sleep in them, they can hide in them, makes them feel comfortable. But it also gives them something to grab onto when they're climbing around your enclosure. What plants you choose to use, whether shape, style, texture, like plastic or silk, whether you want them to be real, that's all up to you, but you will have to buy enough plants to cover the size of your enclosure, whatever that may be. Besides the plants, you're going to need some hides in your enclosure. Now, I always recommend having one at the top, one in the middle, and one at the bottom. The one at the top and the middle are the most important though, and I definitely think you should have more than one. Now, the last thing about your enclosure is you're just going to want to add some basic enrichment. Now, besides the hides and the plants, which are kind of a necessity, you're going to want to fill it up a little bit more just with things of your choosing. So you could choose either some vines. There's a lot of different vines you can choose from, pretty much anything in the reptile aisle that you think would fit. is okay for your gecko. And even some people will find things in like the bird section that you would hang in a bird cage, like those little coconut hides or kind of like bridges and ladders and stuff like that. I have seen people use those as well. But that is everything for in the enclosure. So now we're going to move on to the care aspect of a crested gecko and kind of what you're going to need in order to care for it properly. So the first thing that I'm going to start with is your food. The number one thing you're going to need is their Crested Gecko diet, also known as meal replacement powder. It is basically a powder that you just add water to, and it's made of different fruits, vegetables, and insects. That's pretty much what they live off of. Some top brands I recommend are Repashy and Pangea. They're definitely going to be the most expensive in the store, but generally when it comes to pet food for any animal, the more expensive, the better it is. And another thing that they can have is insects occasionally as a treat. This can be either once a week, maybe every couple of weeks. They can eat mealworms, crickets, anything like that. But you can give these on occasion. You don't want to give these as a staple diet because they're kind of like candy to your gecko. It's always a good idea to give them an insect every once in a while. Another thing about food that is not necessary, but some people do like to add it, is a reptile vitamin. Occasionally they will dust their insects with it. On the occasion that they give an insect. Sometimes they will mix it in with the powdered food. That is all right as well, but you just want to give it in moderation. That is everything that you're going to need for food. So now we're going to get on to the last section, which is just some additional items that I think you should have before getting a crested gecko. The first thing I'm going to start off with is a travel carrier. Now, even if you don't plan on taking long trips with your gecko, you're going to want to have one of these anyway. The number one reason you're going to want it is for cage cleaning purposes. And then another thing that you might want to have it for is if you ever have to take your reptile to the vet. Which brings me on to the next point. Have costs aside for going to the vet. No one wants to take their crested gecko to the vet, but these animals can live a very long time. They can live up to 20 years. The likelihood of your gecko needing to see a vet at one point in his life is high. Now, the next thing that you're going to want, and this is an absolute must for crested geckos, and you're going to need a spray bottle because they need such high humidity. They need to have that water in their enclosure a lot of the time, and they need to have it misted down. So you're going to have to make sure you have something like that to keep the humidity up in your enclosure. Next thing you're going to want is some kind of cleaner so that you can clean your enclosure. Now, crested gecko enclosures get very dirty very quickly because you are spraying water on them so much. They develop a lot of mineral deposits, even something like vinegar. There is some lime scale remover that you can use that's a lot more expensive, but it's basically vinegar. And then if you want something that just makes your enclosure smell good but is safe for your reptile, you can use that as well. So that is everything that I can think of that you're going to need before you get a crested gecko. So I hope you found this video helpful and maybe have more of an idea of either what you need to buy, maybe what you have left to buy if you started already, or even how much it's going to cost you to set up one of these geckos. Now, crested geckos are one of the more affordable geckos simply because their requirements are so little. Like, their food powder goes a really long way, and you don't need heat, you don't need lighting. They're very easy to take care of. So definitely the most affordable gecko. So if you're looking at this video trying to see if you can afford it, it's not cheap, but it is definitely the cheapest. So that is one thing to keep in mind. But I hope this video was helpful to you, and I hope I delivered it in a way that was slightly entertaining and engaging. But that is all for today, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye, guys.